Welcome back to another template design video, and today we're going to look at the Maiden, which is another one of those templates that is defined by the green complex. So it can go on any sort of par, and the original in fact was a par 3 from Royal St George's. What is a Maiden? Well, imagine kind of a sideways Biarritz with a flat plateau at the front. So if we're looking at this, you've got two raised wings either side, and that's really what defines the Maiden. It can be used quite commonly on par 4s. You see the odd par 3, and it's something that I think is a really interesting template for adding variety of angles and distances, and we'll see a range of different ways to use this. It's another one of those that's very flexible in how it can be used, but it can very much add some interest with pin positions. So first of all, as mentioned, there's those two raised plateaus which are going to house probably one pin each, and a bit of a swale in the middle. You can have it so that it's a lot wider and that swale in the middle could be pinnable. You can have it so that basically they're quite small plateaus and there's nothing in the middle that's pinnable either. It's really pure choice. What I think is important with a Maiden more than anything else is that you offer the angles and options in order that people can choose whereabouts on the fairway they are dependent on where the pin is. So for this one, for example, I don't really want to be coming at it from the left hand side of the fairway. I want to be going at the right, so I'm making the most of that small little plateau. As a result, I want to be running the ball kind of down here and hitting mid-center of the fairway. If the pin were on the left hand side, I don't want to be coming over that big swale and leaving the ball potentially running down there, because that's going to be a nightmare putt coming back up. So I actually might consider for the pins on the left laying up over this side of the hole, so that I've got more of a straight shot hitting up that tier and using that backstop rather than hitting across it. But it's very much a choice thing on this one. You could hit driver down here and take the shorter shot any day. For pins at the front, I think you've got a little bit of a Levin aspect here with that bunker and how it's running back into the hole. So you might want to be left. Front left is probably going to be, I would say, your easiest hole because you can use these as backstops. So the next Maiden we're going to look at is the 16th at Shawnee Run by Pithy Dr G and Joe Golfer G. And you can see straight away with this one, off the tee, you've got pretty much complete freedom to do what you want. They've had a bunker this side and a bunker short right of the green, so the more you're bailing out towards the right hand side and not challenging this bunker, the more you're coming in at this one, over this one, on towards the green. The same thing as before, it's this green complex, as you'll see coming in, that really makes the hole. And you've got those two raised plateaus, so back left and back right, and then there's some interesting contouring behind this bunker, which I think is a really fun little pin position, because one of the things I love about Maidens is how you can use the front of those two tiers to create some really interesting backstops. If you imagine what this green would be like if it was just one plateau, so there's no swale in the middle of the back, let's imagine there's just a straight line here. Well, you don't really have to be accurate, you can just bomb at this and you're probably coming back and this pin becomes, you've got a birdie putt somewhere on this sort of distance. Whereas now, if you're going for this pin and you pull it a little bit and you end up, rather than hitting the backstop here and funneling back down, you suddenly go through here, well, you've got a nightmare of a putt where you're trying to play over the corner of the tier and then down, and that's going to be really tough. So it does put a bit more of a premium on accuracy. So then you're starting to think, well, should I play a little bit more out this side? You've got this slope that will feed it in, but if you leave it up a little bit too high, that could be a nasty little putt. And then the other aspect of this one that I liked was it kind of has a little bit of a knoll to it as well. Not a template we've covered, but you'll see that it falls off on every side. So you don't want to be too far off this right hand side, or you're in heavy rough and you're chipping back down. You certainly do not want to be long, as was the case on some of the others we've looked at. So what this one does again extremely well is it gives you another green where there's micro targets within it. You can play to the centre and you've probably got a pretty easy 2-putt for, well, not easy but manageable. But if you get a bit too greedy and you start chasing pins on these tiny little tiers, well, and you go long and short side yourself, well, suddenly you're playing back and you're coming right the way down the tier from every single direction. So it's a really fun hole design. The next prototypical hole we're going to look at is the 8th at Springbrook Country Club, and this one's a par 3 which mirrors the original, the 6th at Royal St George's, which was actually played over a dune originally and was blind. But you can see straight away you've got these two back plateaus, both with kind of falling off on all sides in this case. And one of the interesting things I think about this one is they almost function a little bit like spines, where if you're slightly over, or you're facing an uphill then downhill putt, so that can make it even trickier if you bail a little bit too much to the centre. But this fulfills the same function. If you're looking at where you're going off the tee, so we'll just draw our measure tool so you've got a rough idea. It's basically forcing you to be even more precise if you want to get a birdie chance. You can possibly roll it up the slope, but you'd have to be pretty close to the front, or you're facing... It's not going to be necessarily a difficult hole to get a par on. You can play pretty much anywhere in the middle of the green and you've got a decent putt, but the amount of internal contouring means that if you're on the wrong side, that's going to be even more difficult. And you can face some really interesting putts. Let's say you land on this side and you're trying to get towards this pin. Well, the ball's breaking in pretty much every single direction, and you're negotiating that little false front as well. But the same thing really applies. Personally, I prefer to use this concept on a par 4 or par 5, because that way you can kind of change the angles at which people approach these two little plateaus. But it can work really nicely simply for segmenting a green and making very small targets. If you've got people trying to chase a birdie, they're going to have to really hit their number and be accurate, whereas playing towards the centre of the green, you're probably getting away with a par. There's not much more to this one. It works really nicely on a par 3 of this sort of length. You could do it on a shorter par 3 as well, because then you're challenging that real accuracy with a wedge. And with this one of the things I liked as well was the drop off behind. You definitely did not want to go long, and given that you've now made it so you don't want to go left, you don't want to go right, you don't want to go short, you don't want to go long, if you're choosing where you're aiming, you're probably erring on the side of, well, where's the least penal miss? Personally, I wouldn't want to end up long, so and I wouldn't want to end up in that bunker. So I'm probably, for this pin, aiming about here. If it goes into the swale, well, I'm taking my chances at putting up and making a 2-putt. If it goes short, probably the same. Whereas left or long, you've got a tricky little splash shot, and we know how tough those can be in this game. So there's lots of options just in this green alone. So we're looking at the first at Raynor Ridge here for one of our maiden holes. This one's a little bit of a spin on the template in that typically the two plateaus you would see are left and right rather than front and short, which tends to be more of a double plateau idea. But you can see that we've got those two raised wings, so you've got one up here and one to the front. You've got the little hollow here, and the rest of the green's on one sort of plateau as well. To be honest, you could probably term this a plateau rather than a maiden, but we can debate. What I like about this one, as ever with Joe's designs, is the angles that he's using and also the way he's making you think about distance. With this green, you could possibly even drive it downwind where it is today, but otherwise driver, particularly if you haven't got the longest driver, brings that greenside bunker into play, which potentially leaves a really tricky splash shot towards that back pin. You want to be thinking about whether you're leaving a full wedge in which case this bunker potentially comes in, and depending on pin position as well, it's whether you want to be left or right and just how far down. So for our final look at this, we're looking at one of my very earliest courses in Marlette Fells, and this is at a time when I absolutely loved this template and thought there was loads of variety with it. I still do, but I've moved more onto other ones. So you can see straight away the two raised plateaus here, right and left, and you've got a slightly lower section in the middle. Where this one slightly differs, and I might call it a bit of a twist on it as a result, is that there's no front right or front left portion, it's just runoff. So same concept, slightly different in execution. It's also, and this one, a short par 4, and the reason I love this one in particular, you've got first of all these two centerline hazards which slightly segment the fairway. Bear in mind this course was designed for TGC 19, so the shot down the left hand side was much easier than it is in this game. If we look at pin 1 though, you start seeing where the little bit of a chess match comes in. So you want to be thinking, how do I want to be approaching this pin? Well, it runs off behind. If you get a bit too greedy, it runs off in front, runs off left, runs off right. So you might be thinking, what's the decision? They're all rubbish. We've got a really big slope here, and if you're attacking it from this side, you've maybe got 4 squares of green in which to land it. So you're going to have to be really precise if you're coming from the right. If you're coming from this direction, well, suddenly you've got probably about 8 squares in which you can land it, and a slight upslope here that will slow the ball down, whereas here it's all running away. We then look at the length of the hole, and that's where this really comes into play. Well, let's say we do hit driver and we get down to this little bottleneck here, say, or if we even clear this bunker somehow, which you can do downwind, you're left with 50 odd yards. You're hitting basically a splash shot from this angle and trying to stop it on a sixpence, which is going to be really, really tough. Whereas if you choose to lay up and go down here with, like, say, a 5-wood or a 3-wood, landing and ending up in this sort of area, you've probably got a full wedge out, which is going to stop a lot quicker. You can play even more safe, you can play way back here and you're still going to have a wedge in. It's not going to be the most difficult shot in the world, and you can land it a little bit short and probably run it on as well. So there's loads of options just by looking at, well, okay, there's runoffs everywhere, but which one is the most penal and which one allows me a bit more margin for error? If you look at then the other areas of this green and where the pins are, you've got one in the front. Well, you could basically land it short and run it down here. You've got one here, so same thing, you can land it and run it down, or you can use a backstop, or you can kind of play straight through this channel if you hug the left hand side like we would have done for this one. And then you've got this back pin here, which is just nasty, and you probably want to be playing from the right hand side towards, because otherwise, as you can see, it's kind of doing the reverse of this tier. So this one's long and narrow, this one's wide and shallow, probably. So based on all of that, on a short par 4 where you can see the pin from the tee, I think that gives you a really good understanding of, like, you can see what the strategy is, how do you want to go about it. If you know the green shape and how much that dictates where you want to play, and these slopes, they're the defining feature of the hole, those are really basically guiding you as to what the most sensible way to play the hole is. You can still play it from short side, you've just got much less margin for error. Like I say, I think it's a really fun hole design, and there's lots you can do with it with angles from the tee into those tiers. So that's the Maiden. It's a really versatile template that offers a lot of variety with how you can really force decisions off the tee on par 4s or par 5s, and even can be used on par 3s. The green complex I find can be really interesting and pose quite a lot of questions and really make people go flag hunting. It's a fun complex to build and gives you I think it's one way you can really use this green to influence angles and decisions off the tee. I hope that this has helped as ever, and yeah, stay tuned.